Hello and welcome back to Legally Brewed, where we're serving up some coffee, some law, some life, some facts, and some stories from time to time. Back with Mauro Cantatori over here.
And I'll be our little average middleman to your lawyer expertise.
Yeah, he's going to be our, I don't think we've settled necessarily on a name. Mediocre Mauro. It's supposed to be like a spin-off of your average Joe. No pun intended, because we're drinking coffee. But what we'll be talking about today is something near and dear to our hearts. We just welcomed a newborn boy, newborn baby, into our lives. So, we're going to take a different spin on things today and kind of talk about paperwork, documents, legalities that and things that you should probably think of once you welcome your little bundle of joy, or even if you have kids, right, who are, however old they may be. It's just things to consider. So I know you had mentioned kind of, oh, there he goes now. I know you'd mentioned kind of three things that you wanted to talk about today. So,
Yeah, I mean, like
take it away.
the first being obviously the whole insurance issue, right? Like that's one major thing that, when he came in, I made the phone calls to go get him on the plan. And besides that, I mean, you mentioned that there's so much more to it than that, than just making, the phone call. I mean, what is there more than that?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting, and this doesn't really necessarily specifically have to do with legalities or the legal world, but your newborns are actually covered for the first 30 days under your policy. Typically, the mom's policy, or if the mom doesn't have a policy, then it would be the dad's policy, one of the parents' policies essentially. But after that 30-day mark, you absolutely have to get them on their own insurance, and they're often a little pricier actually than their own parents' policy. But you have that 30-day window. And after that, a lot of insurance companies will not even allow you to make any additions or changes. So definitely got to keep that in mind. Make sure that it's set up, and it's set up in time, and it's set up properly. You're mitigating any potential legal consequences. For example, right? You forget to, God forbid, set up your kid's health insurance. You think you did it, or you just didn't do it. You're going to incur a bunch of medical bills, whether your child is a newborn, or whether they're a toddler, or whether they're a couple of years of age, right? You're going to incur a bunch of debt. You're going to get sent to collections, possibly, if it's a couple $1,000s, right? Or even a couple $100 that you just don't pay, or you don't know about. And then it just spirals from there. And then you're in some legal mumbo jumbo, right?
Yeah. And that was my biggest fear, right? God forbid he has to go back because he gets sick and he doesn't have the proper coverage. Just a night in the hospital costs thousands of dollars, and if you don't have the coverage, then that's coming out of your pocket, and that's just not worth it. All that issues.
Yeah. You might as well just get covered, and that's what insurance is for, right? And I'm going to go back to saying it. Mitigation is pretty much just such a solid protection, always, right?
Yeah.
You want to mitigate issues before they start.
Yeah, and there was also another thing that I saw, which was like setting up like a trust or all these other things, but we haven't really gotten a chance to speak to about like how does that work?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the most important things that you could set up, right, for your child or children. And there's two types of trust. There's a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust. So the revocable trust is basically it's a living trust. It can be altered throughout time, where the irrevocable trust is just it's kind of one and done, can't be changed. And when you set up these trusts, you have to set up what's called a grantor or a trustor, and it's a person who you can essentially entrust with this trust, for lack of better verbiage. It's a lot of and this is the person who's really going to manage the funds that you're putting into this trust account, and you're really trying to protect the assets and the interests of your child or children when you do this.
So essentially, we're creating a trust fund baby.
Yeah, if you end up setting up a trust, they do in fact become trust fund babies. But it's really a way, all joking aside, to just make sure that their future is protected. God forbid, in case something happens to you or I, or obviously the parents of the child. It's just a way to make sure that they have some assets, something to turn to. And even if you are living, right, it's a way to ensure that as they grow older, they have something for their future.
Right. So, with all that being said, right, mitigating all these issues with making sure he has something, set up for his future and stuff like that, what about like setting up like a power of attorney, right? Like between me and you, I guess, if we can't be found, I guess, right? That's like also other things that we have to kind of consider, right?
Yeah, so you're hitting on the third thing that I wanted to discuss, right? Insurance being one, trusts and making sure you have the right grantor or trustor is super important as well, somebody to manage those funds. But along the same lines of a grantor or trustor is this power of attorney. And the way it works basically is us as parents, we'd give somebody this power to make decisions on our behalf. Mm-hmm. Especially, again, God forbid something happens to us. You're always trying to plan for the future. God forbid something happens, we need somebody to be able to make the decisions that are best for our child or children, right? And basically, we'd be granting this power of attorney and authorizing an individual to act on our behalf.
Okay.
And make decisions on our behalf. God forbid we're unable to make them.
Yeah.
Essentially.
So I mean, these are definitely like things that you have to definitely take into a lot of consideration, right? Between, making sure he's set up for the future and in case something happens to us, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think all of this, and a fourth thing that just comes to mind when we're talking about trusts and wills and insurance is just making sure wills are set up.
Yeah.
To just make sure that I think the key really here is to make sure that the future is planned for, because once you have kids, again, whether you have a newborn at home or whether it's children of age, right? You want to make sure that the future is protected, and really outlining in your will all these aspects and your assets and making sure that they're provided for down the line.
Yeah, I mean, even in my job, when I was fixing his insurance documents, there was a little checkbox was accidental death in life, and I'm like, wow, I had this premium on the lowest, and after this, I just cranked it all the way up because you never know, right? Yeah, exactly. So at least you'll be able to have something. So it happened, knock on wood. Right. But it makes you really think about some of these things once faced with these choices. Yeah,
and all this being said, planning for the future, you just want to make sure that when it comes to this power of attorney, when it comes to these trusts and grantors, that you have good backup plans and you have good backup people that you're considering. Wouldn't just pick Joe Schmo off the street, obviously, to manage these account and be in your children's lives, but also, I think it goes back to mitigation. It goes back to having the right legal resources and making sure you're planning accordingly. And I know these things, we certainly didn't think of these things before.
Yeah.
Before we had a child, and so I don't recommend thinking 10 years out, but definitely if you plan on having children in the near future, I would get on these things right. Sooner rather than later.
Hey, even if, like, in the future, you might need to reassess. Maybe you need more money to go into these accounts. You need to reassess the power of attorney. Maybe it was, your estranged cousin, cousin that became estranged after, a family outing. You might need to reassess if he's going to be the power of attorney, or, maybe somebody that's a trust, in that trust.
Yeah. And going back to trust really quickly, you got to be careful. And this is where kind of the spiel about seeking legal advice and really going to somebody who knows what they're talking about. But, if you're setting up an irrevocable trust that can't be touched, that can't be changed, just be very, very mindful of that. These are things that sometimes you can't go back and say, oops, sometimes a one and done kind of deal. So definitely take a look at options, take a look at everything that's involved, and just make sure you're making an informed decision. This was really, this mini-sode, we're going to call it, is meant to be more of a primer than anything, and to ensure that some bells are ringing, right? I know our bells were ringing, and we had to do our own research, even being a lawyer, about these things that have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and I guess this was pretty insightful. I think now is probably a good time to go make a bottle and, probably wake our little guy up.
Yep.
And, make sure he's happy and healthy.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode. We'll have more to come in the next couple weeks. I know, again, this was more of a mini-sode. Excuse us, we did just, again, welcome a newborn, but we'll be back with more content in the weeks to come. Cheers.
Thanks.